Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures, the solo actual play podcast where stories are told at the speed of dice. With me, Steve Morrison, your game master and solo player. Now come on, let's grab the dice and see where our story goes.
Welcome back for our third and final session of Artefact, as we have now played through Act 1, Newly Forged, and Act 2, A Time of Glory. And now we move into Act 3, The Ruination. But before we get to Act 3, let's just do a quick recap. In Act 2, we encountered two more keepers. One by the name of Ogden, who was a bandit king, who raided this ancient city of the Comitian Empire and discovered Advisor in the palace of the prince, returned back to the land that would eventually become the kingdom of Resden, and through Advisor's assistance, began to gather these disparate bandit groups under a single banner, becoming their king for all intents and purposes. During his life, he kind of, I think, started to regret some of the behaviors of his youth. And as a way of making amends for his stealing of this artifact, he sent it back to the ancient city with his regrets. And once it returned to the city, became entombed in a mausoleum dedicated to the prince who discovered it in the catacombs, Ibrahim. And there it sat for 600 years until it was pulled out of that mausoleum by members of a religious order called the Supplicants of the Holy Fire, who were, I think, inspired by the visit of Asharia Fey Blessed to the city, having brought this amulet to the city before Ibrahim found it in the catacombs. And so it sat in their own treasure vault for a little while before it was assigned to Daphne, a seeker of these supplicants, who was assigned to hunt down an ancient evil in the city. And because Advisor had this experience of plumbing the depths, the catacombs of the city, was assigned to her, was given to her, and Advisor led her down through the catacombs. They found this ancient evil and then purged it away with sacred fire. But in so doing, Daphne expended her own spirit, and they barely made it back to the surface before she lost consciousness. Advisor was taken by the other members of the order and returned to a vault, and Daphne herself never woke from the slumber that she fell into, her spirit having been consumed by the effort to purge that evil. Advisor sits in this vault for a time, and then through a crack in the wall, an ooze appears and slithers its way through this vault, picking up various items, including Advisor. And then it slips back through that crack, that hole in the wall that it's made, and disappears into the underbelly of this ancient city. And that is where we left Advisor for 100 years in the belly of this ooze. And now it's time to select our new keeper. Rolling a d4. 2, an archivist collector. They are observant, austere, and maniacally organized. Let's give them a name. I'm going to roll 2d6 on my Maze Rats table, and I'm going to roll a d4. 1 to 2 will be a female name. 3 to 4 will be a male name. Is a female name 3, 6, Ursula. Ursula is the name of this archivist collector. I think what happens is over that century, this ancient city, much as it was centuries ago when Asharia came here, is known as a place of ancient knowledge. But I think in the last 100 years, a sort of university has built up in this city. And Ursula is a scholar who has studied at this university and through her studies has come to know the legends of Asharia and Ibrahim. And there is a moment maybe where she and maybe some people that she has hired or who are attached to this university are plumbing the depths once again of the catacombs beneath the city, looking for knowledge, looking for ancient relics. And they stumble upon this ooze. And the thing that's interesting about this ooze is that, well, there's a couple things that are interesting. I think, first of all of the other items that it collected from that vault, the religious tokens, the gems, they've all dissolved in the course of this century. But being mystical in nature, Advisor remains untouched by the acidic nature of this thing. So that's the first interesting thing. They find this ooze that has this amulet kind of floating in the midst of it. But the second, and I would say arguably more interesting thing is, according to the question that we answered, this is a sentient ooze. And so I think in that, an intervening probably 70, 80 years that Advisor spent within the belly of this ooze, I think that they have developed some sort of rapport and some sort of understanding, because Advisor is a sentient item and this ooze is sentient as well. And there's no reason to think that they wouldn't have developed a way to communicate. And so I think a very strange thing happens for Ursula. As they find this ooze, they see this amulet in the midst of this creature, and maybe the attendants who are with her are like, brandishing torches, ready to try and burn this thing. When Ursula hears this whisper in her mind that says, "Do not harm this creature, and I will be yours." And she holds up a hand and is like, wait, let's see what happens. And there's this brief pause as Advisor speaks to the ooze in whatever way it's learned to communicate, and imparts upon this ooze the idea that their time together is coming to an end, that Advisor is meant to be with these mortal beings. And so in a sight that I think these attendants who are along with probably would retell in taverns across the city for years to come, the ooze slinks back into the shadows. But as it does, this medallion slides and slithers down to the floor and is left behind. And almost without thinking about it, Ursula steps forward and picks it up. And it's perfectly smooth. It's not slimy at all, which is strange having come from this ooze. And again, without thinking, I think she just puts it on. And Advisor says, "Hello, I am Advisor. How may I be of service to you?" So let's answer the keeper questions. Describe the archives they oversee and where you're stored. So I think we've already established that there is this university here, a place that is collecting ancient knowledge scattered throughout this city. And I think that it is this large room filled with stacks of scrolls and stone tablets with writings etched into them. I'm really thinking a Library of Alexandria kind of thing here. But I think that Ursula, being a scholar who is attached to this archive and is a collector here, probably has her own office. And I think this office is set apart from that very sort of frenetic, busy, stuffed feeling section of the archives where all these scrolls and tablets and everything are stored on these massive stacks. And I think that Ursula is not necessarily the head archivist of this collection, at least not yet. So I think her study is relatively small. And I think that she keeps it very fastidious. So there's a small desk and there's maybe a pallet in the corner with a small bed. And there are a couple of shelves with some scrolls tucked on them. But for the most part, it's very orderly and organized in this place. I think she just wears Advisor. I don't think that Advisor is stored anywhere other than she carries it with her and wears it. Second question, which of your former keepers are they keen to study? It doesn't make sense to me that it would be Ogden, because even though Ogden has some history, he's not really related to the city here. And I think that she is interested in ancient knowledge of this city. So it could be Asharia being the first keeper of the artifact. Ibrahim, I think, is a well-known enough figure for historians that that's not necessarily an interesting area of study for her. So I'm going to say that it is either Asharia or Daphne. Let's roll a d6. 1 to 3 will be Asharia. 4 to 6 will be Daphne. A 5. So she studies Daphne. And I think that it takes years of observation as Advisor watches her study what pieces that she can of maybe what is now regarded as an old religious order that maybe has even died out a little bit. The fire has dimmed, as it were. And it takes a few years of observation before Advisor begins to share some tidbits about Daphne. And I think that Ursula is excited to hear these stories, and they spend time reminiscing over Daphne, and her legend has grown as almost the trajectory of the city changed because of the destruction, the purging of that evil that was buried deep within. And I think that for Advisor, there's a wistfulness in talking about Daphne because he never got to see her again. They went through this great trial, delving the depths of the catacombs and purging it of this ancient evil. And then, like a flame that's snuffed out, she was just gone. And so I think it's difficult for Advisor to share these stories about Daphne. But he does it anyways because there is power in remembering those who have passed. So let's now select victories and valor or neglect and mischief. Once again, I'll roll a d6. 1 to 3 will be victories and valor, and so forth. A 1, so a victory and valor. Rolling a d6 again. 6, your keeper uncovered an insidious conspiracy in their people's ruling class. With your help, they exposed the devious scheme. What was the price for speaking truth to power? During this time, studying Daphne, Ursula and Advisor walk across the city and visit the various sites that were important to Daphne. And of course, eventually, they descend once again into the catacombs. I think this is even a few years on from when Advisor shared the first stories with Ursula. As now Ursula has convinced Advisor that she needs to see the site where Daphne expended her soul energy to purge this evil. So they gather up some supplies and they set off deep into the bowels beneath the city. And they find this ancient place where that pool of ichor once sat. And it's gone. It's completely evaporated at this point. And so there's just like this smooth stone floor. But the thing that is left behind are these ancient markings. Maybe they were arcane runes at one time that was used to summon this ancient evil, whatever it was. The evil is gone, but the runes remain. And I think that while they're down there, they discover that there are members of the city council who have found this chamber and are coming here regularly, trying to understand these arcane runes in an effort to summon something, power, that will give them the ability to overthrow the prince, who I think is probably fairly devout and maybe even a little mild-mannered, and they are more warlike and interested in pushing the city's power outward, whereas maybe the prince is keeping them restrained. Ursula and Advisor overhear some of these plots and plans. They both understand the risk. If these city council members, these schemers, are able to unlock the power within these runes, at best, they're going to plunge the city into war for who knows how long. At worst, they're going to summon back this evil that Daphne spent her soul to banish. And I don't think after spending years studying this seeker that Ursula could stomach such a thing. And I certainly think that at this point in Advisor's life, to ignore the sacrifice of Daphne would be untenable. So they leave this chamber and they escape back to the surface, and they begin spreading word, accusing these powerful people of playing with ancient and evil forces. And I'm going to roll a d6. And I think the higher the number on the die, the better this goes for them. That's a 4. So that's not bad. I think that the prince eventually hears of these rumors and summons Ursula to an audience where she explains the situation with Advisor's help. And the prince is convinced. And so the prince has these magisters imprisoned for conspiracy against the city. But the side effect to this is that the prince now wants to understand what this is. And so he assigns scholars from the university to go into the depths and begin exploring and trying to figure out what these arcane runes are. I think that Ursula tries to convince him that this is incredibly dangerous. With Advisor's help, they're attempting to almost whisper in the prince's ear together that this is not a good idea. But the prince, I think, is not as concerned by this, and so orders the research to go forward. And the more that research continues and the more that Ursula speaks out against it, the more out of favor she falls, not only with the prince, but also with the university. Now it's time to answer an artifact question. The place you were created fills you with dread, and you never wish to return. What is the root of this primeval fear? Advisor was forged on the now long shrouded island of Elfheim, where the greatest Fey kingdom existed. The thing that strikes fear into Advisor's heart is the idea that if it is taken back to Elfheim through the shrouding, no one living, no one out here in the mortal realm knows what the shrouding is. And I think there is a very real fear that if he's taken into the shrouding and back to Elfheim, if Elfheim even still exists within the shrouding, that just crossing that boundary into the shrouding would cause Advisor to be unmade. Consider how the Keeper loses you. Well, I think in a strange rarity, perhaps, it is old age that takes Ursula from Advisor. They've spent a long time together researching and then fighting the good fight against these individuals who are researching these arcane runes. But eventually, as has happened to all of the keepers that Advisor has known, death comes for Ursula. But not a sudden death, not a violent death. No, there comes a day where she takes to her bed. She wishes Advisor a good night, as she has done for years upon years. And she closes her eyes, and she goes to sleep, and she never wakes up. People from the university come and take her body away. And as was written into her will, Advisor is gifted to the university to guide a future generation of scholars. And maybe in a strange way, this loss is the hardest yet. Because I think in all likelihood, this is the longest he has spent with a keeper, maybe since Asharia. We don't know how long they were together, but she was a Fae, so she was much longer lived. So it may have been a couple hundred years that they were together before her death. But this mortal woman, this scholar, who discovered him in the catacombs, this loss feels somehow more painful. Now, I'm just remembering that with the victories and valors, I was supposed to change something, a trait, a detail, something like that. So let's think about that. Changing could be adding, removing, or modifying something. I think we should add a trait. The traits right now are whispering, beguiling, and determined to act. And I think the new trait that I'm going to add is against evil. So now it's time to choose our time. A 4. A millennium. That's quite a bit of time. Choose 1. Dust and rust, shifts and currents. It's going to be shifts and currents again. The sun turns, empires rise and fall, and heroes fade to memory. You are obtained by a traveling merchant, ignorant of your true power, and rest undisturbed amongst their chests for a long time. What is the strangest place you visit as they make their extensive circuits across the known world? The university is in the Comitian Empire, which is in the south of this continent. And I think this traveling merchant travels up through the Freelands, up through Faramork and Felvan, into the frozen wastelands, and down along the mountains to the tower where the Council of Light stands. Then descending back down once again into the Vale to visit the great merchant city of Heartvale, and across the water down to Davenar, to Ultima, down to Larsha, and through the wilderness, and up into Anshwar, and along the border to the northern wilds. And I think the place that is most strange is this wilderness between Larsha and the kingdoms of the West. One doesn't have to travel through the wilderness to get from one side to the other. You could go around it, and many do. But those who wish to arrive faster travel through this wilderness. And there are many stories about what this wilderness is, what caused this barren, rocky place where things are quite not right, where dreams don't always stay in the sleeping realm, and where day and night are sometimes confused. Perhaps there was some ancient battle that happened in this place that imbued it with arcane energy. Perhaps it is cursed by the gods. For Advisor, there is a strange feeling to the air as he remains tucked away in the bottom of a sack, tucked into a chest belonging to this merchant. How this merchant came to possess Advisor? Well, for 1,000 years, the university was a place of learning and knowledge. But things change, and the Comitian Empire turned away from looking to the past, thinking of themselves as looking only to the future, and the university fell out of favor. And to pay the various debts that had accrued over the years, it started hawking off artifacts and riches. And that is how Advisor came into the hands of this traveling merchant. time to change something else. Another trait, perhaps. Whispering, beguiling. Maybe we'll take away beguiling. And I think instead of beguiling, it's going to change to reluctant to connect. And it is this, I think, remnant of having been in the hands of Ursula and then basically forgotten for 1,000 years. Just doesn't want to connect anymore. Now, at this point, it says here, because we are in the third act, if you feel you've spent 10 minutes at rest across the entire game, or if your story is ready to end, this keeper is your last. Well, I think we may have spent close to 10 minutes resting, but I think we should do one more keeper, because I like the symmetry of 2 and 2 and 2. So I'll roll my d4 one more time. 1. A pair of treasure seekers. They are opportunistic, argumentative, and short-sighted. So I think it is somewhere on this side of the wilderness. They traveled across it to Anshwar. They traveled back. And now they're making their way through Larsha back to the sea, continuing back on this route that the merchant traverses. When they stumble upon this pair, Balthazar and Demona, they're a brother-sister duo, and they are eager for treasure. They're eager for reward. And because of this eagerness, I think it tugs a little bit, just a little bit, at Advisor. This determination to act, having been carted across the world by this merchant, unable to influence anyone or anything. And so I think Advisor reaches out and exerts a little bit of influence on the merchant, and the merchant sells them Advisor as essentially an item to seek out treasure, that it is enchanted in such a way that it will guide them to treasure. And they are eager to take it. Questions here are: describe how they operate despite their mutual distrust. Which is interesting because I have labeled them a brother and sister. And so I wonder what would cause distrust between brother and sister. So I think I'm going to say that they are half siblings. And it is that half sibling bond that keeps them working together because their skills are complementary. But it's the other half of that relationship that causes the distrust, because each of them has the DNA of a betrayer, of someone who doesn't hold to their arrangements. And I think that for a time, they share possession of Advisor. Balthazar wears Advisor one day. Demona wears Advisor the next. But at the end of the day, it's Demona who ends up with Advisor more and more. And I think that is because she is the clever one in the group. And more, Advisor struggles to interact with Balthazar and instead prefers Demona. And because of that, subtly influences Balthazar that he doesn't really notice that the days that he gets to wear Advisor wane. But the cost to that is there is always this simmering tension between the two siblings. And on the surface, they know what that simmering tension is. But I think there's an unconscious part of Balthazar that knows that they are allied against him and that Advisor and Demona are spending more time guiding their course. And he doesn't have as much say in their direction. Victories and valor, neglect or mischief. Victories and valor once again. A mythical beast or immortal guardian stood watch over an ancient treasure. I swear I did not lean on the dice for this. This is perfect. With strength or trickery, and your help, of course, your keeper overcame them. What were they protecting, and why did your keeper need it so badly? So they leave Larsha behind, and they travel south through Tiernan and end up in Othral, where they hear rumors of an ancient treasure, an ancient lord who once roamed the seas and brought back great wealth and was buried with it deep within a mound somewhere near the sea. And there are legends about this tomb that the ghost of this lord stands watch over these artifacts. Their spirit infused with the mystical power of the artifacts collected and able to withstand death, if only within the bounds of this tomb. And so, after much searching, they find the tomb. And what they discover is artifacts from all over the world, but most of them are Fae in origin. And so with Advisor's help, Demona is able to, with trickery, change the tune, because a lot of Fae magic is born from music. And Advisor can pick up this resonance within these items that are in this tune. And Advisor is able to help Demona reach notes that change and alter the tenor of this frequency. And so this immortal spirit that is guarding this tomb, that threatens death upon them, is overcome. And they're able to recover the pieces within it. And I think the reason that they needed it so badly, Balthazar and Demona, they think it's because they need wealth, of course. But Advisor knows, based off the research that they did beforehand and the frequency of the items there, that there is an item that was crafted by Zuthair, his own maker. And that this item will be of great use to those who wish to fight evil. And I think in his travels with that merchant, he picked up little pieces here and there of people across the world fighting the overwhelming push of darkness that rises here and there. And he wants these items to be found and to be available to those who have to rise up and overcome that darkness. I think we should change reluctant to connect. I think the new trait is going to be the long view. And this is the idea that Advisor is now almost 2,000 years old and has a long view of history and the world. And we're going to get rid of reluctant to connect, because I think in a way, Advisor wants to connect with everyone. We are going to answer one more artifact question. You were once given as a present to someone your keeper was madly in love with. They felt it was improper and returned you with a scornful retort. What made them feel that way? So I think it's after they plunder this tomb. They make a considerable fortune off of selling these ancient relics to various collectors and people who are interested parties. And Balthazar and Demona settle down to retire from their treasure-seeking ways. And I think that Demona finds someone who can pierce the sarcastic, cunning veneer that she presents. And it's after a long time of kind of developing this trust that she gives this person Advisor. And I think that something has happened to Advisor over the years, as we've seen. These traits that have come and gone. And Advisor is still whispering, and I think in some ways continues to be a voice in anyone who wears him in their ear. But Advisor has also become determined to act, to fight against evil, and to have a long view of history. And I think that those things create this weight upon Advisor that can't help but be transferred to those who carry them. And so this lover receives Advisor and puts the amulet on, and that weight feels like a burden. And so they return it with a scornful retort, a snide remark about a gift that is a burden. And I think Demona, who had just started to open up, I think that breaks her heart. And she is gone in the night. And I think that Balthazar is gone as well, because I think she goes to him and says, there's one more treasure we can find, and convinces him to leave their fortune behind, to go delve yet one more dungeon, one more hidden tomb for one last piece of treasure. And I think that Advisor carries that scorn and that pain And I'm going to add the trait, burden. Consider how the keeper loses you. Well, I think they go find another tomb. But this time, Balthazar isn't strong enough. Demona isn't clever enough. And the two of them are trapped in some vicious, arcane trap at the bottom of this dungeon. Unlike the long, slow decline of Ursula, this happens in a flash as a ray of energy comes out of nowhere and catches the two of them as they cross a threshold. And like that, they're gone. Dust in the wind. An advisor falls to the ground, separated once again from his keeper. And this is his last keeper. This is the end of Advisor's story. Lost in the depths of a hidden tomb, rumored to be full of treasure, and yet perhaps there is but one more piece of treasure now lost here. And perhaps someday in the future, someone might delve this tomb and find Advisor, Kingmaker, crafted by Zuthair of Elfheim, carried by Asharia, Ibrahim, Ogden, Daphne, Ursula, Balthazar, and Demona. But as that flash of energy fades and the dust of his keepers settles to the ground, an Advisor is there in the darkness. He waits for another keeper.
Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures. If you enjoyed the show, please spread the word. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or support me on Patreon at patreon.com/errantadventures. You can also buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on all the socials is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the deep, liars.